If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. Marcus Aurelius.
If you want to understand human behavior at its most fragile and most predictable, study what happens when someone feels corrected. The moment you challenge a person's assumption, even gently, even respectfully, you can watch their psychology reorganize itself in real time. Their breathing changes, their posture shifts, their eyes harden. You can almost feel the invisible drawbridge of the mind rising to protect something sacred, their sense of self. Human beings do not defend the truth. They defend the version of themselves they believe must remain intact. Defensiveness is not simply emotional reactivity. It is a multi-layered psychological defense system built from childhood experience, identity formation, cognitive bias, and social conditioning. When someone feels criticized, their brain interprets it not as information, but as a threat, a perceived attack on competence, worth, belonging, or stability. And once the threat response is triggered, the higher reasoning centers shut down and primitive mechanisms take over. So what you're really witnessing in a defensive person is not stubbornness, it is self-preservation. From a psychological standpoint, defensiveness is rooted in ego protection mechanisms, primarily denial and projection, cognitive dissonance avoidance, the need to maintain internal consistency, attachment wounds, fear of rejection or inadequacy, identity fragility, a self-concept too shallow to withstand contradiction, status preservation, the social fear of appearing wrong, weak, or uninformed. From a strategic standpoint, this makes communication a battlefield. Once defensiveness emerges, logic becomes useless, facts backfire, advice becomes an insult, even well-intentioned clarity feels like hostility. The defensive mind is not trying to understand, it is trying to survive. And from a philosophical standpoint, defensiveness is the clearest evidence of how deeply humans cling to illusion. We do not want to be accurate. We want to feel intact. We do not want to grow. We want to avoid shame. We do not want the burden of truth. We want the comfort of self-deception. This is why the people who claim to be open-minded are often the most easily threatened. Their openness is aspirational, not structural. There is a paradox at the heart of every defensive reaction. We want to be seen as strong while secretly fearing we are fragile. This fear creates the very behavior that weakens us. Defensiveness traps people inside the limitations they refuse to confront. It prevents them from learning, improving, or repairing relationships. It immobilizes growth. And ironically, it exposes the very insecurity the person is trying to hide. The more rigid the reaction, the more fragile the identity behind it. This is why the most powerful individuals, leaders, negotiators, thinkers, are not those who defend themselves most intensely, but those who remain curious under pressure. They understand that vulnerability to correction is not weakness, it is adaptability. The truly strong mind is one that can remain open even when pride aches. But this law is not simply about other people, it is about recognizing your own invisible armor. Because the truth is uncomfortable, every time you feel the urge to explain, justify, interrupt, or push back, it is not wisdom speaking, it is your ego convulsing. You are not defending a principle, you are defending an identity. To master this law is to master one of the most powerful skills in human interaction, the ability to reveal truth without awakening resistance. This requires understanding the architecture of the ego so thoroughly that you can navigate it the way a surgeon navigates the body, with precision, patience, and respect for its volatility. You learn to soften your language, to redirect energy, to frame ideas in ways that bypass the hidden wounds people protect. You shift from confrontation to collaboration. You stop triggering the instinctive walls that rise the moment a person feels judged. And in doing so, you gain influence. Because once someone feels safe, their mind opens. And once their mind opens, they can finally see. The law of defensiveness is not about avoiding conflict. It is about understanding the psychological structure of the self so deeply that you no longer take resistance personally and you no longer create it unintentionally. Human beings do not fear improvement. They fear exposure. They fear inadequacy. They fear the possibility that they are not who they believe themselves to be. And until you understand that fear in yourself and in others, you will never truly understand human nature. Defensiveness is not a personality quirk. It is a deeply embedded psychological reflex shaped by thousands of years of evolutionary pressure and decades of personal experience. To understand it, you must strip away the moral judgments we place on human behavior and examine the underlying machinery, the neuroscience, the emotional architecture, the cognitive distortions, and the strategic vulnerabilities it creates. At the core of defensiveness is a simple truth. The human mind experiences criticism as a threat to survival. This is not metaphorical, it is biological. When someone perceives an attack on their competence, judgment, or character, the amygdala triggers the same neurochemical cascade that would activate if a predator leaped from the trees. Heart rate rises, attention narrows, cortisol floods the system. Executive function, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, goes offline. The mind regresses to primitive modes: fight, flee, freeze, or fabricate. This is why logic fails in moments of defensiveness. You are not speaking to a reasoning mind, you are speaking to a threatened identity. But what makes defensiveness especially complex is that the threat is symbolic. The predator is not a tiger. It is the possibility of inadequacy, the fear of humiliation, the exposure of ignorance, the unraveling of the narrative a person uses to navigate the world. The ego is not simply pride. It is a psychological operating system built from attachment needs, the desire to feel worthy, wanted, and safe; cognitive coherence, the need to maintain a consistent self-story, social survival; the instinct to protect status and avoid shame; emotional wounds, past experiences of rejection or ridicule; identity investment, the belief that I must be this kind of person. When you challenge someone, even gently, you press on all these layers at once. You're not simply correcting a detail, you're threatening the structure that allows a person to function. A weak structure produces extreme defensiveness because the mind cannot risk cracks. A strong structure produces openness because the individual can integrate new information without collapsing. This is why emotionally resilient people handle criticism well. They do not experience it as identity death. But most people have never intentionally strengthened their identity. They inherited their self-concept from childhood conditioning, social feedback, cultural norms, and the narratives they've rehearsed for years. And because the structure was never examined, any challenge to it feels catastrophic. This is also why defensiveness and insecurity are inseparable. The more fragile someone is on the inside, the more aggressive or evasive their defensiveness becomes. People with shaky self-worth cannot metabolize correction. It overloads their system. Behaviorally, defensiveness manifests through predictable mechanisms: reinterpretation, twisting your words to maintain ego safety reversal, making themselves the victim of your correction; counterattack, shifting focus to your flaws; withdrawal, shutting down to avoid emotional exposure; rationalization, constructing elaborate justifications. dismissal, minimizing the importance of the critique. Projection, attributing their own insecurity to you. Stonewalling, avoiding resolution by refusing engagement. These are not conscious strategies. They are automatic, and the more threatened the ego feels, the more extreme the reaction becomes. From a strategic standpoint, the biggest mistake people make is assuming that offering clarity will automatically lead to better understanding. But clarity often threatens the ego more than confusion. Confusion is safe because it does not force identity revision. Truth requires psychological restructuring, something most minds resist fiercely. This is why leaders, negotiators, and emotionally intelligent individuals rarely confront directly. They understand that people accept truth only when their ego feels unthreatened. Influence is not about delivering information. It is about guiding the mind through the barriers that prevent it from receiving information. Defensiveness also sabotages personal growth. It creates a loop. A flaw or limitation appears. Someone points it out or life reveals it. The ego reacts defensively. The lesson goes unlearned. The pattern repeats, often with greater consequences. Thus, defensiveness is not merely a communication failure. It is a developmental block. If you cannot tolerate the discomfort of being wrong, you cannot develop the capability to be right. If you cannot face your own contradictions, you cannot resolve them. If you defend your weaknesses, they become permanent fixtures in your life. And the most destructive part? Defensiveness feels justified to the person experiencing it. The reaction seems rational, even noble, because the ego has reframed the situation. I'm not being defensive, I'm protecting myself. This illusion is what keeps people trapped for years inside unexamined patterns. To understand this law is to recognize that human beings are not primarily truth-seeking. They are self-preserving. And the individual who learns to navigate that reality, in themselves and in others, gains a level of psychological power few ever reach. In the late years of the kingdom of Astera, there was a chancellor named Veridan, a man widely regarded as brilliant, persuasive, and ruthlessly competent. His rise had been meteoric. His reforms brought prosperity, order, and national pride. But beneath his brilliance lived a flaw more dangerous than ignorance. He could not tolerate contradiction. His ego was polished, sharp, and brittle. Any challenge to it rang like a hammer against glass. At the height of his influence, Veridan surrounded himself with yes-men, ambitious officials who learned quickly that questioning him brought disdain, while praising him brought reward. The council chamber, once a forum of rigorous debate, became a theatre of flattery. Warnings softened into suggestions, suggestions softened into silence, silence turned into complicity, and Veridan, buoyed by the comfort of constant agreement, mistook compliance for wisdom. The first cracks appeared when tensions rose with the neighboring kingdom of Orwyn. Their emissaries delivered a message. Orwyn sought negotiation, not conflict. But Veridan interpreted the gesture as weakness. When his generals urged caution, reminding him that Astera's armies were exhausted from previous campaigns, he saw their concern as an insult to his judgment. "Are you suggesting I don't understand my own kingdom?" he snapped. The generals fell silent. Their silence sealed Astera's fate. Veridan launched an aggressive campaign, believing unwavering confidence was the same as strategic clarity. His ego reframed dissent as betrayal. He dismissed intelligence reports that contradicted his assumptions. He accused advisors of cowardice. And when early losses arrived, he blamed sabotage rather than flawed strategy. The defensive mind would rather invent enemies than admit error. Meanwhile, Orwyn waited. They studied Veridan's rigidity. They watched him react impulsively to every perceived slight, and they realized the most powerful man in Astera was also the easiest to manipulate. They fed his pride. They leaked flattering messages through unofficial channels. They praised his unyielding vision, and Veridon, craving validation, swallowed their bait whole. He marched his army deeper into enemy territory, exactly where Orwin wanted him. The decisive defeat came at the River Thalin. Veridon had been warned the river's banks were unstable in the spring. Multiple engineers attempted to show him soil reports. He waved them away, irritated. The warnings contradicted his timeline, and to him, contradiction was disrespect. He ordered a full crossing at dawn. The river swallowed hundreds. The enemy encircled the survivors. Astera's military strength collapsed in one brutal afternoon. Defeat broke the kingdom, but it did not break Veridon's defensiveness. When he returned to the capital, citizens gathered to hear his explanation. Instead of accountability, he offered a final act of ego preservation. He blamed his generals, the engineers, the council, the poor morale of the troops, even the fickleness of the river itself. He blamed everything except the one thing that mattered: his inability to listen. A mind that cannot accept criticism becomes immune to truth, and a leader immune to truth becomes a danger to everyone beneath him. In the years that followed, Astera dwindled. Borders shrank, trade faltered, confidence in the crown eroded. Yet Veridon clung to the illusion of his infallibility. Alone in his chambers, surrounded by documents he no longer allowed anyone to revise, he convinced himself he had been sabotaged by small men who could not appreciate a visionary. He died with his legacy in ruins, and still certain he had been right. Historians remember the fall of Astera as a geopolitical tragedy, but psychologists read it differently. They see the perfect case study of defensiveness, destroying not only relationships, not only institutions, but entire nations. Veridon's downfall was not caused by a lack of intelligence, competence, or passion. He had all three in abundance. His downfall came from the one thing he lacked: the ability to be wrong. Defensiveness is not merely a personal flaw. In the wrong position, in the wrong moment, it becomes catastrophic. It blinds, isolates, distorts, and ultimately consumes. Veridon believed that admitting error would weaken him, but in the end, it was his refusal to do so that made him powerless. When you study defensiveness not as a momentary reaction, but as a stable psychological pattern, you begin to understand its true power. Defensiveness is a lens through which people interpret reality. It doesn't merely distort individual conversations, it shapes entire worldviews. A defensive person reorganizes information, relationships, and even memory to preserve their self-concept. This is why defensiveness is not just a communication problem, it is a perceptual problem. At its core, defensiveness reveals a fundamental truth about human nature. People do not experience the world as it is. They experience the world as it must be for them to feel intact. If the world contradicts their beliefs, they revise the world, not themselves. If events expose their limitations, they reinterpret the events. If feedback threatens their identity, they weaken the feedback, not the identity. In this way, defensiveness becomes a subtle form of self-deception, not intentional dishonesty, but the mind's attempt to maintain equilibrium by filtering out anything that disrupts the story it relies on. Philosophically, this is one of the great paradoxes of the human condition. The ego constructs an identity to prevent vulnerability, but that very identity becomes the source of our greatest vulnerabilities. We cling to our opinions, our judgments, our narratives, because without them, we fear collapse. But clinging freezes development. You cannot grow while gripping an outdated version of yourself. From a psychological standpoint, defensiveness is an avoidance strategy. It allows people to evade the discomfort of cognitive dissonance, the tension that arises when reality differs from belief. The brain seeks resolution, and the easiest resolution is not internal transformation, but external blame. It is less painful to assume others misunderstand you than to consider the possibility that you misunderstand yourself. The tragedy is that defensiveness masquerades as strength. People equate certainty with confidence, resistance with conviction, refusal with authority. But these signals often reveal the opposite. A person who cannot tolerate correction is not strong. They are brittle. A person who must always be right is not secure. They are terrified of being exposed. A person who shuts down instead of reflecting is not in control. They are controlled by the very emotions they refuse to confront. Strategically, this places defensive individuals at a disadvantage. Their refusal to absorb accurate information reduces their adaptability. They misread situations, misjudge people, and miscalculate risks. They alienate allies. They incentivize dishonesty because others learn to withhold truth to avoid conflict. Their environment becomes an echo chamber, comforting but dangerously misleading. This is why defensive leaders fall, why defensive partners create cycles of conflict, why defensive individuals repeat the same life mistakes with religious consistency. If you cannot tolerate information that challenges your worldview, you will always be outmatched by reality, because reality does not negotiate with ego. But defensiveness also exposes weaknesses in others that you can use strategically, ethically or not. When you understand what triggers a person's defensive reaction, you understand where their identity is fragile. You see what they fear. You see what they need validated. You see how to approach them, how to bypass resistance, and how to direct conversations without provoking the emotional barricades that shut down reason. This is not manipulation. It is intelligence. You cannot influence a mind that is closed, and you cannot open a mind by force. You open it by understanding its structure. The deeper truth, however, is that defensiveness is universal. Even the wisest individuals feel its pull. The difference is that the wise recognize the moment the ego flares, the internal tightening, the surge of heat, the urge to interrupt, and they pause. That pause is the birthplace of maturity. It is the moment where identity can expand instead of contract. It allows the individual to step outside their instinct and choose evolution over protection. Ultimately, defensiveness forces us to confront a difficult question. What matters more, being right or becoming someone capable of growth? Most people unconsciously choose the former. They sacrifice improvement at the altar of pride, and then wonder why their life does not change. The few who master this law, who quiet the ego long enough to absorb truth, gain a rare advantage. They become adaptable, they become self-correcting, they become unoffendable, and because of that, they become unstoppable. They do not crumble under contradiction. They expand because of it. Defensiveness protects identity, but only humility transforms it. If you want to master the law of defensiveness, you must begin with a hard truth. Defensiveness is a sign that the ego has taken control of the conversation, and once the ego takes control, progress becomes impossible. Communication freezes. Insight evaporates. Every word becomes ammunition, not information. For this reason, the first practical lesson is not about changing others. It is about recognizing when a discussion has crossed the threshold where rational dialogue is no longer possible. 1. Learn to detect the early signs of ego activation. Defensiveness rarely announces itself with shouting. It begins subtly. A shift in posture, a tightening around the eyes, a sudden urge to justify, interrupt, or correct. These micro-responses are biological warning systems. When you see them in others, slow down. When you feel them in yourself, stop. Nothing intelligent emerges from a mind in fight or flight. Your responsibility is to recognize the moment the ego steps in and refuse to engage with it. 2. The person you're speaking to is not resisting you. They're resisting the implications. This is one of the most important psychological insights you will ever learn. Criticism does not hurt because the content is offensive. It hurts because of what the content implies. You didn't think this through implies incompetence. You overreacted implies emotional volatility. You misunderstood implies inadequacy. The defensive reaction is a shield against implication, not information. When you understand this, you can reframe your communication in ways that minimize perceived threat. 3. Never confront ego directly. Redirect it. Direct confrontation triggers escalation. The ego interprets pressure as hostility and doubles its defenses. Instead of telling someone what they did wrong, show them what could be possible if they adjusted. Influence is not about pointing out error. It is about guiding someone toward a version of themselves that feels desirable and achievable. Humiliation closes minds. Aspiration opens them. 4. Speak to the identity they want to have, not the identity they're defending. People will often reject truth if it threatens their current self-image, but they will accept the same truth if it aligns with the person they desire to become. Replace "here's what you did wrong" with "here's what someone at your level would do next." It transforms correction from an indictment into an invitation. 5. Understand that defensiveness thrives in environments of uncertainty. People become defensive when they feel exposed, judged, or unprepared. The less control they feel internally, the more control they demand externally. If you want to reduce defensiveness in others, create clarity. Clarify your intentions, your tone, your expectations, and your goal. Ambiguity amplifies threat perception. Clarity reduces it. 6. In yourself, defensiveness is a diagnostic tool. When you feel defensive, do not justify it. Investigate it. The ego flares when it feels a wound has been touched. That means defensiveness is a map of your deepest insecurities. If you follow the flare, you discover the fracture. And once you know the fracture, you can finally repair what has controlled you for years. 7. Do not offer unsolicited advice. Most defensiveness arises because feedback arrives before readiness. People accept truth only when they feel safe enough to hold it. That requires timing, rapport, and emotional awareness. Advisors who fail to recognize this fall into the trap of correct but ineffective. Truth delivered at the wrong moment becomes indistinguishable from attack. 8. When someone becomes defensive, stop arguing and change the level of the conversation. Defensiveness cannot be solved at the content level. You must shift to the emotional level. Try. I'm not questioning you. I'm trying to understand your reasoning. I'm on your side. I'm trying to help us solve this. I'm not attacking you. I'm asking because this matters. You are not conceding. You are lowering the ego's guard so logic can return. 9. The cost of defensiveness is cumulative and severe. Every time you reject feedback unnecessarily, you repeat error. Every repeated error becomes habit. Every habit shapes character, and character shapes destiny. Defensiveness is not merely a communication flaw. It is a long-term threat to competence, relationships, leadership, and stability. People do not fail because they are incapable. They fail because they refuse the information that would make them capable. 10. The ultimate warning. If you cannot question yourself, life will do it for you. The defensive person believes they are protecting their identity. In reality, they are weakening it. They delay growth until consequences become unavoidable. And when reality delivers correction, unlike people, it does not soften the blow. A mind that cannot absorb truth will eventually break against it. Master this law, and you will understand people. There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that the greatest obstacles they face are not external, not other people, not circumstance, not fate, but the internal structures they have spent years defending. And among these structures, none is more subtle, more persistent, or more suffocating than defensiveness. Defensiveness is the invisible wall that keeps insight out. It is the silent force that stops growth before it begins. It is the reflex that transforms gentle truth into perceived hostility. Most people never see this clearly because defensiveness feels righteous from the inside. It feels like self-protection, like standing your ground, like preserving dignity. But step outside the emotional immediacy and you realize something far more painful. Defensiveness is not protecting you. It is imprisoning you. Every time you reject feedback, you reject a doorway to improvement. Every time you defend a weakness, you reinforce it. Every time you insist on being right, you guarantee that you will not become better. Human beings are wired to preserve their identity, but maturity demands something more difficult. The ability to revise that identity when evidence requires it, to allow new information to pierce old assumptions, to let humility replace pride long enough for understanding to take root. In this sense, defensiveness is not simply emotional, it is existential. It reveals what a person truly believes about themselves. A fragile identity cannot tolerate correction. A stable one welcomes it. The mature mind understands that being wrong is not a death sentence. It is the first step toward becoming wiser. But here is the truth most people never confront. The world will not adjust to your ego. Reality will not soften itself to protect your feelings. Life does not negotiate with your insecurities. You can defend yourself against criticism for years, but eventually, the consequences you avoided will arrive with greater force. The mistakes you protected will solidify. The relationships you resisted repairing will erode. The lessons you postponed will return with a sharper edge. The ego can delay truth, but it cannot outrun it. This is why the strongest individuals are not those who build the tallest walls. They are those who can lower them when necessary. Strength is not rigidity, it is flexibility. It is the ability to remain open even when pride aches, even when fear tenses the body, even when correction burns. It is the willingness to say, I might be wrong, and that is exactly why I must listen. Imagine what your life could become if defensiveness no longer governed you. Imagine relationships where conflicts become opportunities for clarity instead of arenas for ego. Imagine conversations where you learn instead of react. Imagine decisions shaped by truth rather than fear of exposure. Imagine the freedom of not needing to protect an image, only to pursue understanding. The cost of maintaining a fragile identity is enormous. The cost of revising it is discomfort. Choose wisely. Because every moment of defensiveness is a moment where your future self is denied a chance to evolve, and every moment of openness is an investment in the person you are capable of becoming. In the end, the law is simple. You will grow to the exact degree that you can tolerate the discomfort of seeing yourself clearly, and that clarity, painful, humbling, liberating, is the birthplace of transformation.